My sister had been sleeping with my fiancé for almost 5 months before I walked into my own condo and found out. My family, when I told them, took her side before I finished the sentence. That decision cost them me permanently, and the 14 months since I made my final move have been the best of my life. I'm Tristan. I'm 33 years old. I grew up in Calgary, spent most of my adult life there, built what I genuinely believed was a stable existence. A senior project management role at a commercial construction firm, a decent condo in the Beltline, a future I could actually picture. I was wrong about most of that picture. But I was not wrong about what I saw with my own eyes the night everything came apart. My sister Ingrid is 3 years younger than me. She's always been the spontaneous one, the charming one. The person who could walk into a room and rearrange its energy without appearing to try. Growing up, she was the obvious favorite. Though my parents would never have used that word. They would have called it, "Ingrid just needs a little more support right now." Which was their phrase for most of my childhood. Because there was always something Ingrid was working through. And always some reason why her version of events deserved the benefit of the doubt. She failed out of her first year at university, moved back home, and my parents threw her a welcome back dinner and talked about how brave it was to recognize when something wasn't right for you. I graduated with a degree in civil engineering, got a job that required actual accountability for real consequences, and they took me to the keg and split an appetizer. I was the dependable one, the son who called every Sunday, who showed up with tools when something needed fixing without being asked, who had a TFSA, a 5-year plan, and actually followed through on things. I thought that made me valuable to the family. Turns out it just made me useful. I met Claudia at a mutual friend's housewarming in Inglewood, 4 years before everything collapsed. She worked in communications for a mid-sized oil and gas firm. Sharp, confident, the kind of person who holds a room's attention without seeming to want it. I'm usually the one standing back, assessing, planning. With her I just stopped doing all of that. I was just there. It was strange and I liked it. We moved in together after about 18 months. She had a method for organizing her closet that I found genuinely bewildering but respected completely. She left her coffee cups in locations that were not the dishwasher. I handled the building's condo fees, our phone plan, and remembered to book the parking spot renewal before the deadline. I thought we complemented each other. I thought I was building something real. I proposed in December. On a Tuesday, which is the kind of detail that sounds strange, unless you know that Tuesdays were the thread running through us. The day we'd first actually talked at a terrible work networking event. The day of our first proper dinner. The day we'd signed the lease. I got down on one knee in our living room with a glass of wine on the coffee table. The ring had taken me 3 months to settle on. Rose gold band, round center stone, custom made at a jeweler on 17th Avenue. Just over $6,000. I did not cut corners. When yes, I thought I was looking at the rest of my life. I should have read the warning signs. Claudia and Ingrid had gotten close faster than I'd expected. They were different in ways that should have meant limited overlap. But Ingrid has that pull that makes people want to be close to her. And Claudia was sociable enough to respond to it. When they started texting each other independently, I thought it was good. When Ingrid started dropping by on evenings, I happened to be working late. I told myself that was what healthy family integration looked like. I repeated that to myself several times, which in retrospect tells me something. The night I found out was a Wednesday in March. I had a site meeting scheduled, until at least 7, complicated structural issue. On a commercial build in the southeast. The kind of thing that always runs long. But the engineer canceled at the last minute, and by 5:15 I was in my truck heading home. With a half-finished double-double going cold in the cup holder. I pulled into the underground parkade and saw Ingrid's car in a visitor spot. White Civic. Distinctive dent in the rear bumper she'd been meaning to get fixed for 2 years. I knew it immediately. I remember thinking, nobody mentioned she was coming over tonight. And then I thought, maybe they're planning something. My birthday was 12 days out. Maybe this was that. I took the elevator up. I wasn't quiet about it, but I wasn't making noise either. I opened the front door and walked into my own home. Claudia was on the couch. My old Carlton sweatshirt, legs pulled up. Ingrid was coming out of the hallway that leads to the bedroom. Adjusting her collar, her hair not quite right. Something loose and hurried about her that didn't belong in that moment. She went completely still when she saw me. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. My brain ran through the explanations it could offer. They were looking at something on my laptop. Ingrid had been using the bathroom. There was something reasonable I was about to hear. The explanations ran out of road in about 4 seconds. Claudia said, "Tristan, you're home early." I set my keys on the entry table, very slowly. "What's going on?" Ingrid started to say, "It's not," and stopped. Because there is no sentence in the English language that begins with those words. and ends somewhere useful. When two people are standing where they were standing, looking the way they were looking. I turned to Claudia. I didn't need to ask directly. The expression on her face answered it. That compound look of guilt and exhausted relief that surfaces when something that's been pressing down on a person finally breaks the surface. Even when the way it breaks is the worst possible version. How long? I said. She told me, almost 5 months. I stood in my own hallway and heard that. 5 months. While I was on the phone with the venue coordinator. While I was meeting with the florist she'd selected. While I was going over RRSP contribution limits with my financial planner. To make sure we wouldn't gut our savings for the wedding. 5 months of Tuesday mornings and Sunday calls and sitting across from each other at dinner. And all of it assembled on top of something I didn't know was there. I asked Ingrid to leave. She tried to say something, I genuinely couldn't tell you what, because the part of me that was processing language had gone somewhere else. I said, Ingrid, get out of my home. She got her jacket from the floor and she left. I told Claudia she had until the following evening to collect her things. Not because she deserved the consideration, but because I am not the kind of person who throws someone onto the street at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday with nowhere to go. I gave her exactly as much grace as she needed to vacate. And, not 1 degree more. She tried to explain, began several sentences that were trying to build toward something. Some context that would make it less stark. And after about 2 minutes I said quietly, I don't want to hear any of this. Pack your things and go, she cried. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I called Andre from the parking garage. He and I had been friends since 3rd year of university. He answered on the second ring, heard something in my voice and said, come over. No questions until I was ready. When I told him, sitting at his kitchen table with a glass of scotch in my hands, he went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, both of them? Yeah, both of them. He gave me the couch for the week, and didn't push for conversation I wasn't ready to have. The worst part came around 2 a.m. that first night. I was lying on his couch staring at the ceiling, and the numbness that shock provides, which is actually quite functional, quite merciful in the immediate term, had started to wear off. And what came through underneath it wasn't anger exactly. Though there was anger. It was the images. Claudia. Texting Ingrid. From the dinner table while I thought she was answering a work thing. Ingrid hugging me goodbye at Christmas, knowing what was happening and hugging me anyway. The venue deposit I'd put on my credit card. The ring. The florist. Every ordinary Tuesday that was 2 things at once, and I only knew about one of them. I ran through the timeline until the math made me stop. Then I stared at the ceiling until it was almost 4. Then, somehow I slept. I went back to the condo on Thursday. Claudia had cleared out her things. Efficiently, thoroughly. With an organization she hadn't always applied to shared spaces. She also took the Nespresso machine we'd gotten as a housewarming gift from my aunt, a good cast iron pan I'd owned since before I met her, and the throw blanket that had been on the bedroom chair since my first apartment after university. She left a note on the kitchen counter. I read it in full, which I probably shouldn't have. The structure of it was, she hadn't planned for this to happen. She'd been confused for a long time. She cared about me deeply. She hoped eventually I would understand, and, this is the line I will not forget. She thought Ingrid was a remarkable person, and she hoped I could find peace with that. Peace with that. I put the note in the recycling bin and sat down at the kitchen table in the apartment I'd paid for, and tried to figure out what I was going to do next. My mother called 4 days after Claudia moved out. Ingrid had reached her first and framed it. I could tell by the phrasing my mother used, the specific softness of a situation that developed, as though 5 months is a development rather than a series of choices made continuously and renewed every morning. My mother was upset, and I think she genuinely was, at first. She said it was inexcusable. She said she didn't understand how Ingrid could do this to me. She said she was completely on my side. I gave that 19 days. The second call was different in register. More careful, more tilted. She'd had time to talk to Ingrid, to hear her side, to let the initial shock settle into something that required less from her. She feels terrible, my mother said. You know she loves you. This is still your family. She doesn't get to love me and do what she did, I said. People make mistakes, Tristan. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. She made this choice every day for 5 months. My mother went quiet then said, you sound so angry. I'm not angry, I'm done. There's a difference. I could hear that she didn't believe me. I didn't need her to. My father called 2 days after that. He took the practical approach, man to man, reasonable, let's not blow this out of proportion. Your mother's not sleeping, he said. And Ingrid is a mess. She's really struggling. She can find a therapist, I said. That's genuinely the right resource for what she's dealing with. And I say that without sarcasm. You don't mean that. I mean it exactly as much as I've meant anything I've said in the past 2 weeks. These things happen, he said. You can't cut your entire family off over this. I'm not cutting off my entire family, I said. I'm cutting off the people who, when it mattered, decided my pain was something to manage rather than something to acknowledge. That's a specific group of people who made specific choices. He gave me the sigh. The one I've heard my entire life. The one that says I'm being unreasonable without technically saying it. I didn't wait for what came after it. Take care of yourself, I said, and hung up. Here is what I did differently than I might have done in my 20s. I did not announce anything. I did not explain my plans. I did not give my parents a forwarding address, or a departure date, or any thread they could pull. I'd watched enough of these dynamics play out, in my own life, in other people's, to understand that telling them would only give them something to organize around. My manager Graham had been flagging a senior project management role in the Toronto office for about 2 years. The company had a major transit infrastructure project coming up. A public-private partnership with the city, multi-year, technically complex, the kind of work that's actually interesting. I'd been hesitant because Claudia's professional network was in Calgary, and I hadn't wanted to ask her to uproot. That reason no longer applied. I called Graham the Monday after I found out. By Friday I had a formal offer. Senior role, 22% salary increase, full relocation package. I gave my landlord 60 days notice. I got a new phone number without telling anyone what it was. I deactivated every social media account I had, which took 15 minutes, and removed a significant number of channels through which I could be reached. I sold most of the furniture. I didn't want the associations, and donated what I couldn't sell. I didn't say goodbye to my parents in person. I didn't say goodbye to Ingrid. On the day I crossed the Alberta border heading east, I sent my mother a single text from my old number before I canceled the SIM. I'm gone. Please don't try to find me. Then I blocked every number I needed to block and drove. Andre rode with me for the first half of the drive, across Alberta before flying back. Halfway through the prairies, with the sky wide open, and nothing in the rearview mirror I needed to look at, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been tight for years. Not just from the last 5 months. From longer. Toronto was exactly the city I needed. 3 million people who don't know your history and aren't particularly interested in it. I found a condo near the financial district, smaller than what I'd had in Calgary. But the commute was a 15-minute walk, and I could see a sliver of the lake, if I stood in the right spot by the window. I liked the TTC. I liked that every street was new and I had no associations attached to any of it. I liked building from scratch, because building from scratch felt honest in a way that everything in my Calgary life had quietly stopped feeling. The project was good work. My new team was sharp. Within 3 months I felt more professionally alive than I had in years. I found out through my HR department, about 8 weeks after I arrived, that someone had called the main office, asking to confirm my employment. My manager pulled me in to let me know. The front desk had handled it correctly and given out nothing, but flagged it immediately. The caller had identified themselves as a family member with an urgent message. I thanked Graham, went back to my desk, and sent an email to our company's legal contact about protocols for that kind of inquiry. Then I emailed a lawyer, a recommendation from a colleague who dealt with a harassment issue the year before, and asked what my options were. 3 weeks after that, my father showed up in the building lobby. The front desk called me before letting anyone up. I told them to inform him that I was aware he was there, that I had nothing to say to him, and that he was welcome to leave a written message with the desk which I would not read. He waited in the lobby for almost an hour, then left. I want to be precise about what I felt, because I've thought about it a fair amount since. It wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't softening, and it wasn't satisfaction. It was something closer to clarity. The man who had shrugged off what happened to me, who had said, "These things happen," about 5 months of deliberate betrayal, who had framed my inability to simply move on as the real problem, had driven across the country, and shown up at my place of work, when I responding, on his terms. That is not what love looks like. That is what control looks like, when love is no longer getting the job done. 2 weeks after that, a letter arrived at my home address. I don't know how they found it. 3 handwritten pages from my mother. I read all of it, which I consider a miscalculation on my part. It was an extended account of how the family was suffering. My father wasn't himself, Ingrid was struggling, my mother wasn't sleeping, the holidays had been unbearable. 3 pages documenting the consequences my absence was creating for them. There was no sentence in those 3 pages that acknowledged what had been done to me. Not a line. What it contained, implicitly and in a few places explicitly, was the suggestion that if I could just find it in myself to let this go, everyone could stop hurting. Everyone. As though the pain were evenly distributed. As though I had walked into my own home on a Wednesday and decided to manufacture a crisis out of nothing. I kept the letter. My lawyer had suggested keeping all written correspondence. I filed it and moved on. About 4 months after I arrived in Toronto, my mother and Ingrid drove out together. I know this because my building's front desk called me at 8:40 on a Saturday morning. Both of them, in the lobby, asking to come up. I came downstairs. I am not going to describe this as a dramatic confrontation because it wasn't. I was not shaking. I was not struggling to contain emotion. By that point, the hurt had fully metabolized into something quieter and more definite. Not indifference exactly, but a kind of settled knowing that made the situation feel less overwhelming than it might have 6 months earlier. I stood in the lobby and looked at my mother, who was crying, and my sister, who had the expression of someone who has prepared for many versions of this conversation and isn't sure which one is about to happen. "You made a long drive," I said. "I'm going to ask you to turn around and make it again." My mother said, "My name. I want to say something, and I'd like you to really hear it." I kept my voice level, quiet enough that this was between us and not the lobby. "I'm not angry anymore. I was for a while, and that was the appropriate response to what happened. But I'm past it. What I am's finished. Not as a punishment. Not as a strategy. I'm finished because maintaining a relationship with people who fundamentally don't respect me costs something. And I've decided I'm not willing to pay that cost." My mother started to speak, and I shook my head once. "You had chances to do the right thing at every stage of this. You could have told Ingrid she was wrong without a qualifier attached. You could have let me process this without making it about managing the family's comfort. You could have taken no for an answer when I set a boundary. You chose differently at every one of those points. That's information. I've used it." I looked at Ingrid directly. She met my eyes and then looked down, which told me everything the rehearsed words she'd planned to say probably wouldn't have. "You made choices every day for 5 months, I said to her. Not once. Not in a weak moment. Every single day you woke up and made that choice again. And then you let our parents minimize it, because that was easier than being accountable for what you actually did. I've accepted that that's who you are. But I'm not going to maintain a relationship built on pretending it isn't." I looked back at my mother. "Please go home. Stop looking for my address. Stop contacting my employer. If this continues, I'm going to make it formal. I don't want to do that. But I will." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a smaller voice than I'd expected, "We just miss you." I said, "I know. But missing someone isn't a reason for them to stay." They left. I watched them walk out through the lobby doors, and then I went back upstairs and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and waited to feel something complicated. What I felt instead was simple. It wasn't happiness. It was just solid. Like something that needed to be said had been said, in the right words, at the right time, with nothing wasted. My lawyer sent a cease and desist letter. 3 weeks later, after my building reported another inquiry. Someone asking the front desk whether I resided there. The letter outlined clearly what constituted harassment and what the formal response would be if it continued. I haven't heard from any of them since. I found out through a former mutual acquaintance. Someone who reached out, without an agenda, just to check in, that Claudia and Ingrid had split up about 7 months after I left Calgary. The relationship, built on 5 months of parallel deception, apparently didn't hold much weight once it was the only thing it was carrying. Claudia had moved back east. Ingrid was still in Calgary, still working out what came after the life she'd traded for something that didn't last. I won't tell you I felt nothing when I heard that. I felt something. But it wasn't what I expected. It was closer to the particular exhaustion that comes when you've known an outcome was coming, and you just had to wait for everyone else to arrive at it. What I can tell you is what my life actually looks like now. I was promoted in February, leading phase 2 of the transit project. 11 people on my team, coordinating with city stakeholders, at a level I hadn't expected to reach this quickly. The work is genuinely interesting, and I am genuinely good at it, which is a combination that doesn't always line up, and I'm not taking it for granted. I have real friends in this city. People I've built actual history with, not people I inherited through geography or shared last names. I met a woman in November, through a colleague's dinner. We've been moving slowly and on purpose, which feels right for where I am. She's the first person since everything collapsed, where I'm not working to convince myself of something. I'm just present. That's new, and I like it. I wake up in the morning and nothing in my life belongs to anyone else's comfort. Not to managing Ingrid's reputation, not to being the stable one, so my parents don't have to worry, not to carrying a family narrative that only ever worked. Because I was doing the work of holding it up. My apartment, my routines, my city, my decisions, mine. People ask me sometimes, when they hear parts of this, whether I regret it. Whether some distance and perspective have made me wish I'd handled it differently. Given it more time? Tried harder to preserve something? The honest answer is no, without qualification. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. The people who were supposed to love me without conditions, had conditions I just hadn't discovered yet. When I was reliable and low maintenance, and playing the role I'd been assigned since I was a kid, everything was fine. The moment I needed them to actually show up, to choose me once, clearly, over the easier path, they couldn't do it. And when I responded to that by leaving, they spent months trying to follow me, not to give me what I needed but to get back what they'd lost. Which was the version of me that didn't cost them anything. I'm not bitter about it. Bitterness would require caring what they think. I don't. I just know, very clearly, who they are in a way I didn't before March of last year, and knowing clearly is better than believing in something that was never as solid as it looked. The morning I unpacked the last box in my Toronto condo, I made coffee and stood at the window. The CN Tower was visible from where I stood. The streets were still quiet. I felt for the first time in longer than I could measure, something I can only describe as simple. Not happy, not yet, just here, free. Pointed forward. I chose that. And I would choose it again, without a second thought.